call this meeting to order. Welcome to the meeting number 30 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Science and Research. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the order, or the House order, on June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Pursuant to Standing Orders 108-3-I and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, September 26, 2022, we are continuing our study on citizen scientists. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those taking part by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. In accordance with our routine motion, I am informing the committee that all witnesses have completed their required connection test in advance of the meeting. We have two groups that are presenting today. We have Environment and Climate Change Canada, and the second group is Parks Canada. Each group will have 5 minutes to address the committee. For the presenters, please watch for a signal from me. If once we get down to the final 30 seconds, I'll try to speed you along to make sure that we stay within 5 minutes. So opening up for today, we will have for 5 minutes the Environment and Climate Change Canada.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Chair, honorable members. On behalf of Environment and Climate Change Canada, thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. And thanks to the committee for bringing this important topic of citizen science to the table. Les Canadiens se soucient bien beaucoup de...
Canadians care deeply about the environment, weather, climate, pollution, the state of our rivers, lakes, and oceans, and so on and so forth. This provides many occasions to engage with the public in the field of environmental science.
In earlier committee sessions, science programs that engage the public have many benefits. They increase scientific literacy, empower citizens, create awareness, and they instill a culture of environmental stewardship. They're also a tremendous vehicle for scientific outreach, for sharing our science stories. And when well designed, and speaking as a scientist, this is the crux, citizen science programs and observations can inform scientific analyses, create new capacity, and they contribute to the body of evidence that the country needs in support of environmental management and protection. We could spend a lot of time defining citizen science, and that's probably not the best use of our time here, but it's important to acknowledge that there are many different ways that the public contributes to science activities. Successful citizen science programs include a very deliberate design with strict observational protocols and quality controls. There should be very clear pathways for observations to flow into scientific analyses in support of specific questions or knowledge needs. Results also need to flow back to the public because people want to see the impact and value of their contributions. The department, ECCC, has been involved in a variety of citizen science programs for decades now. Some of these programs are our own initiatives, but others are led externally, where our scientists will engage and sometimes support development of protocols, sometimes just contributing to the data and taking advantage of that data that's available. One example is an extremely successful wildlife monitoring program called the North American Breeding Bird Survey. This is a long-term bird monitoring program that ECCC co-leads with the US, which taps into the enthusiasm and skills of expert birders. And these observations have been foundational to our understanding of bird population trends, ecosystem health, and impacts of climate change. Another example, which I think most of the members are familiar with, is the CABIN program, the Canadian Aquatic Biomonitoring Network, which targets aquatic ecosystem health. And we're very happy to speak more to these programs on specific questions the committee may have. The department also coordinates citizen observations in support of emergency response through phone lines or online tools, where real-time information can be called in on, for instance, dead bird observations or oil spills. There are many other examples where ECCC science programs engage in external initiatives such as eBird or iNaturalist, which are these great online platforms which the committee has already heard a little bit about. Our scientists very much tap into this. And as another example, eBird data mining has been used to assess dead bird observations for early warnings of bird zoonoses. And there are other examples such as Smart Ice or within our weather observations. The Meteorological Service of Canada, MSC, integrates precipitation measurements from grassroots volunteer networks, as an example, sometimes using instruments and protocols that are provided by the department. This committee may also wish to consider community-based monitoring and Indigenous partnership programs where communities are active research partners in environmental monitoring. These are being increasingly led by Indigenous governments and organizations and need to be co-developed to address areas of shared concern, such as water quality, wildlife health, or contaminants. Observations that are gathered through citizen science programs or social media can feed scientific analyses, but I guess we really want to be clear that these represent data points and not the science itself. There's a lot that the citizen can contribute to that scientific practice, but putting it to use requires trained scientists to support data curation, protocols, quality checks, processing, modeling, statistical analyses. In the background context and the existing state of understanding, other sources of data almost always need to be brought into the interpretation. There are many different outputs for this kind of work, including scientific papers, but these studies also directly inform policy and legislation. And again, we'll be very pleased to expand on this if there are questions of interest to the committee. We see very much growing potential within citizen science partnerships at ECCC, and we recognize the value in departmental involvement in these programs, and they're a natural way to expand the reach, impact, and understanding of our science and to build public investment in the science. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that testimony. Now on to our opening statements. For 5 minutes, we have Parks Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good day, bonjour, bonjour. As the Vice President for External Relations and Visitor Services at Parks Canada, I am pleased to be here to address the committee today on behalf of Parks Canada. Let me begin by acknowledging that I am on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. The Parks Canada mandate, identified in the Parks Canada Agency Act, centers on two fundamental principles: to protect and present Canada's natural and cultural heritage. Today, we will summarize how citizen science contributes to achieving this mandate. Pour protéger le patrimoine.
In order to protect Canada's natural heritage, Parks Canada resources must be taken into account, as well as any mitigation approaches that will ensure resilience, durability, and persistence of the conditions of the places and assets we manage. As such, we work with Indigenous partners whose knowledge is crucial to a holistic understanding of Canada's heritage. We benefit from partnerships and collaborations with academic partners, non-governmental organizations, other levels of government, and international partners. At each site we manage, specialists conduct research and assemble relevant information to inform decisions and management. We also appreciate the power of citizen science. Environment and Climate Change Canada's presentation has highlighted the value of certain citizen science programs and demonstrated how they can supplement formal research to inform government programs and decisions.
Made use of contributions from citizen science. While we have not yet incorporated citizen science data into our formal monitoring regime, which supports reporting to Parliament and Canadians on the ecological condition of protected areas under our stewardship, we value citizen science and have put in place a number of different national programs that we can speak about later today in the question period. It's important for us in our national reporting that standards and protocols be applied in a highly consistent manner across Canada, including the most remote parts of the Arctic, seldom visited by citizen scientists. Nevertheless, our scientists and monitoring specialists stay abreast of methodological and analytical developments that may allow us to incorporate citizen science data in our more reporting regime to Parliament in the future. In recent years, we've seen an increased public interest in conservation and have heard growing concern from Canadians related to the pressing and topical conservation issues of our time, including climate change, biodiversity loss, species at risk, and the benefits that healthy ecosystems provide to communities. Canadians express a keen desire to get involved and to help in some way more tangible than just simply becoming more aware. This is where citizen science efforts represent a significant opportunity to involve Canadians in conservation and increase understanding and support. Our public engagement work through citizen science is in early stages, with efforts focused on a selection of initiatives, including Team Up and Clean Up the Shore. Through this program, visitors and community members participate in Parks Canada-led shore cleanups across Canada. While picking up litter and plastic waste, visitors are also helping to collect data and contribute to marine research. This data will allow Parks Canada scientists to identify sources of marine litter and mitigate them. Take a Coastie. This is a shoreline monitoring citizen science initiative led by the University of Windsor in partnership with Parks Canada and based on the existing Coast Snap program developed at the University of New South Wales in Australia. Capitalizing on the social media popularity of selfie photographs, this program encourages Canadians to take photographs of their coastlines at designated coastal monitoring spots in 9 participating Parks Canada locations. And finally, iNaturalist, an international biodiversity database of images and information on natural observations compiled by amateurs, citizen scientists, and naturalists. iNaturalist Canada is led by the Canadian Wildlife Federation, along with Parks Canada, Nature Serve Canada, and the Royal Ontario Museum. Moving forward, Parks Canada plans to continue expanding this preliminary work and explore ways to foster more collaborations and increase the engagement of Canadians in citizen science initiatives in more Parks Canada places across the country. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Thank you so much to both of our witnesses today. We are going to start the 6-minute round with Mr. Lobb.
Thanks very much. This question is for the Environment Canada people that are on Zoom today. And I'm just wondering what role they feel farmers play in the citizen scientist. If they could just comment on that.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. A lot of this will be deferred, I think, more to our colleagues at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. But, Mr. Chair, I would also submit that Aura Pantieras and the Canadian Wildlife Service has some comments to support on this.
Thank you for the question. I think what is probably important to note is that we have about 100,000 Canadians that have contributed data to many of the citizen science surveys. And this could include many of the farmers in the context of monitoring birds. We use bird surveys because they're effective indicators of environmental health, and they occupy every habitat, and they're relatively easy to survey. So we can expand on some of these findings that many Canadians over 50 years have contributed to tracking and monitoring populations of migratory birds with importance across Canada.
Okay, just while we're on that topic, I do have a couple more ag-related questions, but just while we're on that topic, at our last meeting I brought up a question to the bird folks, and I asked them a question because it was in regards to their report from 2019, and you don't have to be familiar with it, but because you brought up the migratory birds, and many of the rural members of Parliament here and in the House of Commons would have wind turbines in their riding, and which I do. I have probably close to 400 in my riding due to the fact that it's close to Lake Huron and the strong winds that come off the shoreline. Does anybody at Environment Canada track how many birds are killed every year because of wind turbines? Does anybody track that? I know they track cats. Somebody was telling me they track cats, how many cats kill birds every year, but I know that's a big number. But I'm just wondering with wind turbines, does anybody track that number?
Yeah,
Thank you.
please go ahead, Aura, and I would also suggest that Jennifer Provencher can probably have some input to this. Thank you.
Maybe I will note that ECCC is very familiar with this paper. In fact, it was the Canadian Wildlife Service analysis of data obtained from citizen science over the past half century that was used in the paper published in 2019 in the highly respected International Journal of Science, which estimated the loss of about 30% of the total bird populations in North America. And so that means that there are about 3 billion fewer individual birds in North America than there were in 1970, which is a stark statistic. And this information was important in terms of targeting needed urgent conservation attention in Canada, the US, and Mexico, including the declines and targeting the declines of shorebirds, grassland birds, and aerial insectivores. I would probably add that it is through the efforts of the Breeding Bird Survey, the North American Breeding Bird Survey, and many citizen scientists that we are able to monitor and assess the decline of bird populations across North America. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Sorry,
thanks for. Should I go ahead? Thank you. So I just wanted to add that indeed we do have several programs that work with farmers directly on their lands to support both bird and bat conservation. And this is particularly true in the prairies where grassland birds are some of them are more species that are in decline. And so there are several programs led by the Canadian Wildlife Service as well as our science and technology branch researchers who are working again on these species that in particular use grasslands and agricultural lands in very specific ways. And so I don't have the numbers in front of us, but we certainly have several partners where we work with the landholders, the farmers on their lands to track different populations of birds, and in particular, how the different types of management of agricultural lands can support biodiversity.
I think I got time for a couple quick questions here to Sean. Sean, I just wondered, when we're making policy, and when I say we, I mean the government and the civil servants, are making policy to, say, for example, the 30% reduction in fertilizer emissions. Do we consult with the citizen scientist who would be the farmer? Do we consult with that individual and say, hey, Jim, do you think you could reasonably reduce your fertilizer use by 30% by such and such a date? Or do we make these targets and then say, hey, Jim, here's what you have to do, pal? Which one is it? And do we respect the citizen farmer scientist when we are making these targets?
Thank you for this question. It's, of course, a good one. This is really into the policy realm, I would say, which is beyond the purview of the scientists and the science managers and science advisors. Here, we were certainly very interested and active in trying to understand the fertilizer usage in partnership with AAFC colleagues and understanding impacts on the environment. But the actual policies of the 30% levels or how this communication works with our partners within the farming community are more at the policy level, not something which I think we can speak to here.
Thank you so much. Now moving on from to the Member of Parliament from the Liberals, MP Lauzon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais...
Thank you, Chair. First, I'd like to thank our witnesses, the witnesses forming this panel. To begin, I'll start with the same department, Science and Innovation. There's a portal online collecting citizen science projects. You've given a number of examples of this, but on the portal, we can see there are 55 projects like Abbé Citoyenne, for example. There's projects on ice, There's projects on different species. Does this portal come from a partnership between ICED and ECCC? If so, how exactly did it come to be? And I'll start with the Minister with Environment and Climate Change.
I've perused this portal and find it very useful. I know of many citizen science projects in the country which aren't on the portal, but it captured a number that I was unaware of. So it's a valuable portal. As my understanding is that it comes from ICED and that there are some programs in various other departments that are also represented on the portal. I think I might have to clarify the role that ECCC may have played or not in the setup of this. So we can find the response to this and get back to the committee in writing on that specific question of whether this was co-developed with multiple departments or it's ICED-led. The portal includes a couple of projects which we mentioned and several others that the department's involved in, like Smart Ice, which we didn't talk about too much, and then many others, some of which are standalone NGOs that don't involve federal government partnerships as well.
Would it be possible to get that information back to us, back to the committee, so that we can include it in the report? Because it's a question I often wonder about. I'm from a rural riding, and in my riding, we don't necessarily have partnerships with SAGEPs or universities. So for regular citizens who want to get involved in science and research, often these people are volunteers or birders, people who are interested in wildlife. What would be the best way to get information to regular citizens, to turn them into volunteer scientists? How could we get information to sectors that want to engage in scientific experimentation?
Thank you for this question. I'll add a bit, and then I would suggest to the chair that Parks Canada may have a big role to play and may have some comments on this as well. I think the portal is a good start to this, but I think a lot of public might not be aware of it. And as we grow citizen science projects, I think it would be very helpful to have communications and outreach strategies to work with schools, to work with communities, to really expand on things. Right now, it's a bit of word of mouth on people that know eBird or iNaturalist and work with each other on this. But I will suggest we hear a bit from Parks Canada here because they have a very valuable role in communicating, connecting science with the public.
So could we get a response from Parks Canada?
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you for the question. I'll pass the mic to my colleague, Manuela Charette. She will be able to talk about our programs. Thank you, Christine.
As mentioned in the opening statement, our three main national initiatives are based on volunteers. So we are promoting these initiatives in our sites. We're promoting initiatives on our website. There is a very clear call to action to be a volunteer right off our main national website, Parks Canada website. So we're encouraging for people to participate in existing initiatives or specific local initiatives that are offered at different sites. And one example I have is it's a very recent a program that we initiated in 2022, as mentioned by Christine in our opening statement. The Team Up and Clean Up Shore, it's a new initiative that was initiated because people and Canadians want to be involved in and volunteer with Parks Canada. So this pilot program is essentially engaging visitors and local communities into this cleaning the shores of Parks Canada, specific Parks Canada places. We now have giving shoreline cleanup kits at more than 9 Parks Canada locations. And we've seen participation of over 250 people who literally collected more than 1,800 kilograms of garbage off the shorelines. So we are promoting this national programs, we are encouraging volunteering, and also some of the local sites are encouraged to visitors and communities to participate.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You had 4 seconds extra there. Now moving on to the next round, MP Blanchette.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, and greetings to today's witnesses. First, I have a question for Mr. Marshall. Mr. Marshall, we heard from various witnesses as part of our citizen science study, and we heard from the chief scientist of Quebec, Mr. Kirion, who came before us and talked about the importance of citizen science to improve scientific literacy. We also understand that the federal government has an important role to play. I have a question about the citizen science portal. When you go onto this portal, the very first thing you see is a project on biological connection in Canada, and then in brackets it says in English only. So my first question, Mr. Marshall, is as an advisor within the Environment Department, how is it possible for a government with 2 official languages to have citizen science initiatives in just 1 official language? How is it possible to really get the Francophone community involved when there are scientific initiatives only provided in 1 official language?
Thank you for this question. I cannot speak to the exact program you mentioned, so I'm speculating here, but my guess is that this is a program run by an NGO, which is probably in English parts of Canada and does not have that federal bilingual mandate. Anything that flows or is run by
Alors, Monsieur Marshall,
Mr. Marshall, you are an advisor. Do you think that this is decent? Do you think it's decent for the federal government to be promoting unilingual Anglophone initiatives on its website?
So that's, again, a matter of opinion. That would be my personal opinion and not representative of the department.
Monsieur Marshall,
Mr. Marshall, I'm going to ask the question again. You are an advisor within the federal government. Do you think that it is respectable? Do you think there's a good way to go about things? Are you advising the government to act in this way? Are you advising the government to communicate about citizen science initiatives in just 1 official language?
Again, as an advisor, and I think it's clear that any of our own programs, anything run by a Government of Canada department, would be in both official languages, but we don't have the purview or authority to advise external NGOs on their communications.
So, as I understand it, what you're saying is that the federal government won't even follow its own law, the Official Languages Act. It won't communicate in both official languages. So, okay, I get it. I see what message you're sending to the scientific community. And I know that you advise public policy with your advice. That wasn't a question. So I'm going to move on with another question. Remy Curion, the Chief Scientific Advisor of Quebec, came to talk about the Engagement program, which encourages citizen science in Quebec. So in Quebec, you can get public funding, and the government supports citizen science. Are there similar things within your department?
I may have to ask for a clarification on the question of public funding to support citizen science. So we have funding that we direct towards citizen science programs, sometimes as a grant contribution to an NGO, for instance. Sometimes it's a university partner, or sometimes it's our own program where we provide some funding to facilitate training or equipment in support of those programs. Was that the question?
Oui, juste reformuler la question, Monsieur.
I'll just reformulate it. Thank you for your answer. Is there financial support that regular citizens can access? Can they propose citizen science programs to your department and receive funding?
Thank you for that. This is a great question. To my knowledge, we don't have a formal call for citizen science proposals, but when people approach us or when we're working with our partners. And if there's some, for instance, Birds Canada or a university research project, if they're proposing a citizen science component to that, we will definitely listen and
Votre réponse, je comprends.
So, as I understand it, you're saying no, there's no direct financial support. You're an advisor. Would you advise the federal government to put in place a program that provides financial support in order to get people involved?
Close for this, but I see that Aura Panteras, who in the Canadian Wildlife Service, has a contribution to support on this question. Thank you.
Merci pour vos...
Thank you for your question. Collectively, more than 100,000 Canadians have provided data as part of one or more scientific investigations on birds. So this includes large numbers of francophone citizen science who participated in eBird or similar Quebec projects. Our department works in close collaboration with our partners to ensure that all of the investigations we run have bilingual interfaces so that we can support participation of Canadians in both official languages. Thank you. That wasn't what I was asking. Ma'am, if I may, I have the floor. Thank you for quoting your talking points, because I can clearly see that you are reading a text that someone just sent you about Mr. Marshall's first question.
Moving on to the next round, Member of Parliament MP Cannings for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, and thank you to the witnesses here today. I'd like to start with Environment Canada. Perhaps Mr. Marshall or anyone else can chip in and talk about, and at the risk of other members of the committee, I talk about birds a lot, and I would like to, we have the North American Breeding Bird Survey was mentioned, and this, I would say, of all the things we've heard about, is probably one of the most important citizen science programs in the world, certainly in North America, because it creates really usable data, very strong data over decades that we can follow the population trends of birds. And in doing so, we can then make inferences about where the problems of our environment are happening. We've heard that we've lost 3 billion birds over the last 50 years or so. That data comes 99% from the Breeding Bird Survey. And this is a program that's administered in Canada by Environment Canada. So I'm just wondering if someone would like to expand on that, perhaps some of the history and where this is used. Again, I could probably expound on it, but I'll let you take the floor and talk about when we are declaring species as threatened or endangered or special concern. For birds, that data comes largely from the Breeding Bird Survey, and it is a bigger data set by far than we have for any other animal or plant or wildlife species. So, Mr. Marshall, I don't know if you want to take the floor on that, but I think it's important to get on the record the importance of this program.
Yes, thank you for this question, and if I can take a moment to thank you for your long-term work and investment in this, it's been valuable. I believe this is a good question to turn to my colleague Aura to comment.
Thank you, and I echo your words, Sean. I want to thank Mr. Cannings for his long-term contribution as a citizen science himself. Mr. Chair, in general, this monitoring that is performed by citizen sciences, specifically the Breeding Bird Survey that we have co-led with the U.S. and Mexican governments for several decades, helps, once validated and curated, contributes to decision-making for conservation. And some of those examples include, for example, evaluating conservation and management actions. It includes with the prioritization on the conservation activities we do. And as we discussed, for example, targeting the declines that have been identified on aerial insectivores, grasslands, shorebird migration, for example. It helps with sustainable management, for example. It also contributes to prioritizing conservation and land use planning. And I think another key element that is worth noting here is that it empowers Canadians to contribute to conservation actions, including, for example, turning that information into conservation activities to protect species at risk. As it was noted, this information is used by the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada that provide advice to the Minister of the Environment on the risk of wildlife species. And it can even be used in the context of regulatory decisions by the department.
Well, thank you. And I'd like to turn to, there was a comment made earlier, I think by Mr. Marshall, perhaps somebody else, about remote communities, northern Indigenous communities, and how they can play a role. We have vast areas of our country, obviously, that it's very difficult to get professionals out on the land, out on the water and ice to collect this data, and community members have been doing more and more of that for the scientists of Canada. And I just would like to name 3 programs here that I've come across, and I'm just wondering if Environment Canada uses data from these, and perhaps just comment more in general. One is the Nunavik Sentinels, that's promoted by the Espace pour la Vie Montréal, that gets community members, especially young people in Nunavik in northern Quebec, out on the land to collect information on insects. The Arctic Eider Society in Sanikiluwak in Hudson's Bay that does similar things. And a new phone app called SIKU, the Indigenous Knowledge Social Network, that promotes gathering of this sort of data. Is Environment Canada using any of these programs in Northern Canada?
Thanks for this question, and you're absolutely right. The Northern Canada is a place where we very much need Indigenous guardians and citizen science to expand our observational capabilities. I might turn to my colleague Jennifer Provencher to speak a bit specifically to those 3 programs.
Thank you. I can speak a little bit more to those programs. The Sentinels program is an academic program and certainly is supported through several different academic networks. And the idea is to go out on the land and make many different types of observations and bring that into a central place. Environment and Climate Change Canada has been more involved in the Arctic Eider Society as well as SIKU. The Arctic Eider Society is focused around southern Hudson's Bay and really was the parent of SIKU. And if I can just spend a little bit more time on SIKU, SIKU is an Indigenous and Inuit Facebook, and it specifically is co-designed with partners in academia. Environment and Climate Change Canada has been involved, community members in Sanikiluwak and other areas. And the idea is to design and put online an application where Inuit can be out on the land and report their observations as they go out and travel. And so in this way, we have partnered and actually developed functionality within the app so that hunters can report dead or sick birds. There is work with our scientists who work on polar bear and polar bear health, so that when hunters and harvesters are hunting or are working with the animals that they've harvested, they can report any abnormalities in the physical condition of the animals. And that information is owned and controlled by SIKU and the Indigenous co-collaborators on that project.
I'm sorry, but we're out of time for that round of questioning. Maybe in the future questions you can expand a little bit further on that. Now moving on to the 5-minute round, we have MP Soroka.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for coming today. Because we're doing so much on the bird study, I was curious about the controls we have in place for accurate information from citizen scientists when dealing with bird deaths, either from buildings, windows, stray cats, wind turbines. How do we determine that they're reporting all the deaths as opposed to maybe half the deaths or something? What kind of information do we have as safeguarding that?
So I know we're working on analyses of bird mortality with colleagues in universities. I might turn it back to you again, Jennifer, if you can fill in a little bit on some of those partnerships.
Sure. One of the things that Environment and Climate Change Canada has supported is the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative. And this is the network of vet colleges and veterinarian groups across Canada, from coast to coast to coast, in both of our official languages. And there is a hotline where the CWHC can receive calls in your area. You may have seen this recently in relation to the bird flu or avian influenza. And what the CWHC does with ECCC support is understand, using those types of reports, both through digital
Point of order.
Just going to pause this for a second. We are having some audio problems. Just 1 minute. Stop. So, colleagues, I think we have it maybe case, but we're just going to keep going and see how it turns out here. So, MP Soroka, I put 10 seconds back on the clock, so you got 3 minutes and 40 seconds.
So that we can't finish answering that question. If that's the case, can it be written submission then, please?
Absolutely. The witness will provide a written submission to Mr. Soroka's questions. So carry on.
Thank you. My other question is sort of following up to that. With the information on the bird deaths in Canada and the U.S., because the study's being done there, do we collaborate with any other countries or coordinate information to see if other countries with wind turbines also are experiencing the same mortality rate? Is that possible or not from wind turbines? Mr. Marshall?
Yes, I'm trying to, behind the scenes, see whether Aura or Jennifer would be best positioned to address that. We certainly are working, all of our science is international, and we're working with colleagues on issues like wind turbine mortality. As an international science community, I don't know if there are specific partnerships that either you, Jennifer, or Aura can speak to, or if we will need to get back with some response. Jennifer has her hand up here. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, I can say that we work on bird mortality via turbines or fisheries bycatch or bird flu through multiple partners. One of those is the trilateral between Canada, U.S., and Mexico, where there's a migratory bird table. Many of our work is also done at the Arctic Council level, so you can imagine the 8 Arctic states. So we share bird populations with the globe, and so we work with several different organizations to ensure that we are coordinated and creating comparable science and comparable citizen science initiatives across those bird landscapes in order to get the best estimate that we can.
Also, a follow-up question. When it comes to bird mortality with buildings, windows, even stray cats, is that classified as climate crisis area, or is that man-made structures? How is that defined for bird mortality?
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. It is separately categorized, and there's a work to break out wind turbine versus building versus cat versus the maybe more indirect effects of climate change and habitat change.
Do we have that kind of information, like I said, from other countries in the world to see if we're sort of on the same wave or same level of bird deaths, or is that not coordinated?
There's certainly a lot of global literature on this and various assessments, including the biodiversity assessment reports I don't know in terms of mortality in Canada versus other countries, if that's something that anyone, Aura or Jennifer, can speak to, or if this is something we should return to you. Aura, do you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would emphasize that there's coordinated work within North America and South America, I would say, so through the Americas. And there is research and evidence that highlights that the mortality of birds related to wind turbines is relatively small compared to windows, cats, and other human anthropogenic activities.
It's relatively small compared to the amount of wind turbines we have right now, but when we continue to increase the amount of wind turbines, it is a factor in the bird population, so that's something to consider. I'll move on to Parks Canada with the iNaturalist app. I think that's quite interesting. Now, first time I've seen this app, so I don't know much about it. Does this app just picture related and then it automatically documents it, or do people have to put in information what they think a species or a plant is in order to get it identified?
Very quickly here.
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. I'll turn to my colleague Stephen to speak more about the iNaturalist program.
Yes, thanks for that question. It's very simple, posting as a normal social media application, but you do get to put in a candidate name for the species, and that is checked by experts. So we have both raw data and data that's verified.
Thank you so much for that. We're out of time now. Moving on to MP Bradford for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for our witnesses today. Mr. Marshall, I was wondering, how can support for citizen scientists and citizen science initiatives be embedded into the departmental processes to ensure ongoing support and maintain institutional knowledge?
Thank you for this question, MP Bradford. And I mean, in a sense, it is embedded already in that we're using a lot of citizen science through both our own programs that we coordinate and through relatively formal partnerships, right? Through to places where we're data mining, but also feeding back on protocols. I think it's a place where I think there are lots of horizons that are probably worth thinking about hard in terms of going forward, and with the power of social media and data mining and artificial intelligence, having a kind of strategy of how best to work with citizen science and expand kind of research and science capacity in this area. It's a pretty active area of concern, but it's already very much built into some of our science programs, and something that I think is likely to grow going forward.
Thank you. So when we heard from Dr. Mona Nemmer, she testified that the knowledge gathered by the Indigenous communities belongs to the Indigenous communities, and they're the holder of the information. So do we have that in your database at all, or do we get their permission that we can utilize that?
I'll have a couple of opening comments, and then I'll pass on to Jennifer for input on this as well. This is something that's very important to respect. So in general, where we have Indigenous partnerships, they do own the data. It's not going to be in our databases or publicly available, except with their explicit and kind of active ongoing permission. So the default is they have the ownership. That might get waived in certain cases, like the SICU app that we've already heard about, or some of the Smart Ice programs where there's partnerships, and they're very happy to share that information on sea ice thickness or whatever the observations might be, but it needs to come from those Indigenous partners. Jennifer, do you want to add on that?
Yeah, thank you for this question. It's a very important topic. And I would just echo what Mr. Marshall said. It's case by case. So there are certainly several applications where that Indigenous knowledge through those applications is available and public. But when we have more specific co-design programs, we strive to follow the OCAP principles so that the Indigenous partners, when sharing that knowledge, can be involved in where that data goes, how it is stored, and what it is used for. And so it is a very case-by-case basis, and we take that into consideration when we are co-developing and co-implementing programs.
Okay, thank you for that answer. What amount of research funding do you provide annually towards citizen science initiatives, and what proportion of your overall research budget funds citizen science? I'm directing that to Mr. Marshall.
I think we don't have rolled up numbers on this, but we have some sense for specific programs. For instance, within Cabin, we've prepared a bit on this, so I might actually turn quickly to Arash Shahasavani to speak on the financial commitments within the Cabin program, and then we'll go to Ara with CWS to speak a bit to finances there.
Thank you very much for this question. On the Cabin program, the Cabin program itself is not necessarily a citizen science program, but because of the engagement, there's a component that has that outreach and ensures standardization. We spend about $30,000 out of a $200,000 budget on Cabin annually to contribute towards that engagement that includes citizen science. That's on average, and that just represents our ability within that 30,000 to do the outreach, to provide training, and ensure that standardization of data that would go into the Cabin database.
How do you assess the return on investment of funds allocated to citizen science initiatives?
With respect to the Cabin program, we've estimated it to be about $1,000 per sample or data generated, which basically means that on an annual basis, we get a return of about $300,000 in terms of data that's generated that would go into the database, and that's an estimate, of course.
Am I out of time?
You are out of time right now.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yes. Now moving on to our 2.5-minute rounds, we have MP Blanchette.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask a question to our Parks Canada witness. We had the Chief Scientific Advisor of Canada come before the committee on February 2nd, and she talked about training and including citizen science as part of our strategy to support people's autonomy, support the autonomy of communities, and improve people's trust in their institutions. That's ambitious, but it's an interesting idea for me. How do you think the government can reach such lofty objectives? Thank you for that question. Certainly. There's citizen scientists can play a major role in data collection and moving science forward. We have three national programs within Parks Canada. We also have numerous examples of initiatives run by communities. Really, there are many possibilities to expand our partnerships with citizen scientists. Thanks. You noted that it's not always possible to integrate data coming out of citizen science. Could you give a bit more details on this? How would it be possible to use data coming out of citizen science programs? Well, Parks Canada is required to report annually on conservation of our national and cultural sites. And in that regard, we really need to take a close look at our data.
Sure that all the data is verified. There's a large opportunity in the future to be able to use citizen data in these further reporting requirements. That being said, we need to make sure that we go through the rigor and analysis necessary. So there's an opportunity to use that data more fulsomely, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we have standard requirements, and that would be the gap at this point in time in terms of having pilot projects across the country. We need to make sure in our national reporting that we have national data points, and that's an area where we would need to expand as an organization as we get further take up of our citizen science programs across the country.
Merci beaucoup. Donc.
Thank you. Just so I can properly understand.
We got 12 seconds extra there. Now moving on to MP Cannings for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you. And I'd like to take this opportunity perhaps to ask Environment Canada, there's been a couple of conservative questions here about the impact of wind turbines. I know Environment Canada has data on that in terms of bird populations because a few years ago they did a study that looked at all the direct mortality of birds, human-caused. I think if I could ask Environment Canada to find that data, I know it's there, I've seen the papers, and provide that to the committee. And it has other impacts such as, direct mortalities caused by oil sands and intensive agriculture. So it puts everything in perspective, and I think we would benefit by that. I don't know how much it has to do with citizen science, but that's what they seem interested in. So I would ask the Environment Canada to provide that in writing. And with the 30 seconds I have left, I'll just maybe turn it over to Mr. Marshall to talk about any citizen science projects that we haven't heard too much in detail about. He mentioned Smart Ice and Cabin, and if he would like to just spend that time telling us about those projects.
Thank you for this great invitation, and we'll certainly follow up with the provision of this information on the studies and the bird mortality and the different sources, because those papers are out there. You're right, that tends to be more professional science research papers rather than citizen science projects assessing bird mortality, but those studies are there, and including our own studies on this. There's not much time, but I think a couple of really interesting projects are coming out of the Meteorological Service of Canada by your invitation. One of them is called COCO-RAS. It's a community consortium on rain, hail, and snow and precipitation measurements. And I should have thought of that when we were asking about the agricultural applications, because there's lots of engagement with farmers in that context. Of course, they care a lot about the rainfall patterns. And that's really bottom-up, grassroots-driven observations of detailed precipitation patterns that data flows into the Meteorological Service to help us understand and interpret the forecasts and extreme weather after the fact. So there's programs like that are coming in and being standardized across the country, which are very interesting for us to tap into.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to our witnesses. We now briefly suspend before resuming in camera. So I'd ask all witnesses and guests to please leave the meeting, and I wish them a very happy rest of your day today.